Good morning and welcome to the latest in the IMAP series of webinars. This webinar certainly attracted a great deal of interest, and in fact I think it might be our best ever attended webinar. So thank you very much to all of those who've joined us today for what is a really interesting topic and one which is clearly central to so many of you thinking about the issues around using and giving advice on managed accounts. I'm delighted today that we're joined by Simon Carrodus, partner at the Fold, and Jenny Mulders, the chair of the IMAP regulatory group and also a compliance specialist with QRC. Before I hand over to Jenny and Simon, let me just tell you a little about a couple of things we have coming up. So I've mentioned previously our Independent Thought series. This is a chance for us at IMAP to showcase what I think is really the cutting edge of portfolio thinking in managed accounts. And that is portfolio thinking as it's developing in licensees and their support people in asset consultants and research specialists, investment specialists. And so the podcast, roundtable and live events that we are developing as part of the Independent Thought program commences with a first podcast in the week of the 12th of October. In early December, in the first week of December, our Investec Technology Conference will be virtual that week. As we learned last year from our early experiences with COVID, we can present 10 sessions through the week, focusing on issues of portfolio management technology, platform technology, digital engagement with clients, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's really one of the cutting edge issues around managed accounts. And then in March, just a preliminary note that the portfolio management conferences that we've staged each year will this year hopefully return to Sydney and Melbourne, as well as our first, but to date 3 times cancelled event in Perth. Before I hand over to Jenny and Simon, let me just say though, we are looking for somebody to join the IMAP team, our investment specialist. It's a part-time role, but it's a paid role, and it's critically important to us to bring into the team somebody who brings investment expertise to work with us in developing portfolio management conferences, independent thought, and the investment-related webinars. So if you think this is of interest to you or somebody that you know, just get in touch with me through the website. Now, of course, we've had a number of questions submitted to us already, and we'll be addressing those through the course of the webinar. But if something comes up for you through the course of Simon's presentation, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Click that and the presenters will see it. So now it's my pleasure to hand over to Jenny Mulders. So Jenny is director and founder of QRC Consulting, a specialist risk and compliance business based in Brisbane. We've been lucky enough to have Jenny as the chair of the IMAP regulatory group for a year or two now. So Jenny, thank you very much for moderating today. Simon, thank you for participating, and over to you two.
Thanks, Toby. So welcome everyone to the IMAP webinar on giving advice on managed accounts. So a few sort of housekeeping issues, and just to give you a bit of a synopsis. Obviously Simon is a lawyer and neither he or I are financial advisors. So the information that we're giving today is not financial advice. So specific advice questions that might go into the Q&A, might be outside of our bounds of what we can cover. So Simon has put together a great presentation and is going to look to address the legal requirements and highlight the attitudes and expectations around what they are and what the regulator expectations are. My role is probably to highlight some of the issues that advisors are wrangling with when trying to provide compliant advice on managed accounts. So we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So I suppose is on this, I often get asked by financial advisors about how they can demonstrate the value proposition of a managed account solution to their clients, what they have to include in an SOA, what could be a file note, or how to otherwise demonstrate that they've met the best interest duty and also the safe harbour provisions. So if the managed account is managed by the advisor, their licensee, or an associated party, this adds another complexity. So Simon has put together a presentation, and with these key facets in mind, I'll hand over to Simon and off we go.
Thank you, Jenny. And thanks, Toby, as well. I'll just share my screen here and
I'll duck out.
that should be okay. Is that showing correctly, Jenny? All right. So this presentation is giving advice on managed accounts. And I want to it's the managed accounts piece that I want to focus on there. I mean, I've done a lot of these sorts of presentations over the years on managing conflicts and best interest duty. And
Simon, still don't have your screen. So.
Oh, okay. I thought I'd done that correctly. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Hang on. That's it. How's that?
Perfect.
Yes. My apologies, everybody. Yeah, as I was saying, I've done a lot of presentations about the broader obligations of financial advisors when advising on financial products generally. And as you know, that could be direct equities, superannuation, life insurance, managed funds. And there's the obligation to prioritise the client's interest. There's the best interest duty and the safe harbour steps. There's the obligation to provide appropriate advice, and recently, of course, the FASIA Code of Ethics. And those can all be applied broadly to a whole bunch of financial products. And of course, we'll touch on those. But what I want to do in this presentation that's a bit different is to focus on managed accounts specifically. So we are going to get very specific about this particular type of product today. So what are we going to cover? Just briefly, we're going to talk about this post-Royal Commission world that we're living in and why it's different from what we were used to up until around 2017-18. We're going to talk about in-house products. I don't think there's any point avoiding it. I was going to put something in at the end, and I realized, no, let's do it up front, because a lot of managed accounts would be, not all, but a lot of them would be classified by ASIC as an in-house product or a conflicted product. Now, of course, we're going to go into the best interest duty as it applies to managed accounts, and I'll walk you through what we consider to be like a robust advice process around researching and potentially recommending a managed account to a client. We'll look at where advisors go wrong, and we'll do a couple of slides on what good looks like and what not so good looks like. We'll talk about product research requirements and comparisons and what should be captured in the SOA. And of course, as Jenny mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end. So this post-Royal Commission world, it's important for us to go through this to understand where we are and what ASIC's looking at. So as many of you all know, since the Royal Commission, so it's been about 4.5 years, ASIC's been prolific in pursuing their fines, and there's been disqualifications and bannings and even criminal charges against licensees and individuals, not just advisors and not just advice licensees, but they've certainly been a part of it. Hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation have been paid. And of course, we all, myself included, but anyone in this industry, advisors and licensees, have been forced to adapt to a much tougher and much different regulatory environment. Much sharper focus on the best interest duty. That obligation was introduced in 2012. We really didn't have any guidance or any regulatory focus on it until 2016, and then suddenly it went from 0 to 100, where it was ASIC's sort of supreme focus shifted to the best interest duty and how and whether advisors could evidence that they'd complied with the best interest duty. Strangely, during those same years, managed accounts, which were already popular, but have grown exponentially in popularity during that exact same time period, that last sort of 4.5, 5 years. So it's probably not surprising that they have shifted onto ASIC's radar. We all know that ASIC had commenced a managed accounts project, which has been shelved, we believe. But certainly there's been no progress on that since COVID. But up until the pandemic hit, there was a project being run by ASIC, and they They'd gone out with a bunch of notices and a whole bunch of information gathering sort of surveillance projects, and they were due to sort of release some sort of a report or an article about their findings, and they had a whole range of things they were looking into, from sort of expertise to conflicts and so on and so forth, and the different managed account structures and the fact that they were different and why they were different. So managed accounts, of course, any product structure that goes through that sort of growth is going to make its way onto ASIC's radar. So what we're going to look at today is what the law actually asks advisors to do when advising on managed accounts. What does the law say? The law and the regulatory guidance. What are they asking you as an advisor to do? And we're going to keep in mind here that, at least certainly with my clients that use managed accounts, the overwhelming majority would be classified as an in-house product, where the licensee is essentially or a related party, the licensee in some cases, is essentially operating the managed account, or at the very least is receiving a fee of some description in respect to the managed account. So without further ado, let's just talk about in-house products, because it's important to keep this in mind when we look at the rest of the obligations. Of course, if you're an advisor advising on an external managed account, best interest duty still applies. Of course, appropriate advice still applies. But a couple of the other obligations don't. And it's just important to keep in mind that if you're advising on an external managed account, external product more broadly, there won't be the same level of scrutiny from ASIC, and we'll talk about the reasons why. But an in-house product, look, the definition that ASIC uses, and we've seen this in numerous reports, is really where the advice licensee or a related party of the advice licensee, it might be a separate business, will receive some sort of additional benefit when the advisor recommends the product, recommends the managed account. So whether the licensee or the related party is actually running the money themselves and charging an investment management fee, or they're performing some sort of portfolio oversight fee, sitting on the investment committee and perhaps charging a lower fee, 15-20 basis points, there's some additional fee there that the licensee or the licensee's group will receive, that they would not receive, of course, if the advisor recommended an external managed account. So again, not all managed accounts are in-house products, but a lot of them are. Certainly a lot of the ones that I work with are in-house products. Importantly, there is no ban on recommending an in-house product. And just to address one of the questions that we got in, there's no ban on receiving a investment management fee or a portfolio management fee in respect of an in-house managed account. What there is, though, is a conflict. And that conflict needs to, first of all, be acknowledged, and then, of course, managed. So almost the worst thing you can do with any sort of in-house product is to live in denial and deny the conflict and say, no, we train our advisors really well. There's no conflict. Of course, there's a conflict. If it's got your name and branding on it and you're receiving an additional fee, of course, there's a conflict or a potential conflict. And of course, you have to acknowledge it. And what you want to do if ASIC comes knocking is say, no, we accept this ASIC. We've thought about this long and hard, and we have all of these measures in place to ensure that potential conflict doesn't result in any client detriment. And we do that by ensuring that our advisors follow a robust process. And we have, obviously a level of pre-vet, and we of course do file audits. Our supervision monitoring is fantastic. And essentially we do everything we can to ensure that our advisors provide advice that's in the best interest of the client. That's how you manage the conflict. Easier said than done. I know that was a nice, neat little snapshot that I gave you there. And doing it on the ground day in, day out is harder, but that's essentially what you need to be. The attitude that you need to have is we accept there's a potential conflict here, but we manage it, and this is how we manage it, ASIC. And the additional obligations, of course, where there is an in-house, where you're considering recommending an in-house managed account, is the obligation under Section 961J to prioritise the client's interests above you, the advisor's interest, or your licensee's interest, and of course, Standard 3 of the FASEA Code of Ethics as well. So those two sort of work in tandem. And to be absolutely clear, this is obviously a focus area for ASIC. If we went back 5 years or even 3 years, I'd say the number one focus area was still fees for no service. And probably the other one was conflicted remuneration. Those two for me, fees for no service is almost a legacy issue now. Annual renewal, annual opt-in has essentially killed that issue. There'll obviously be certain cases, I suppose, it's hard to even imagine how, but of advisors failing to provide service, but that's going to be few and far between. So some of those big fee refund projects are still going on, but it's really, they're in payout phase now. So that's a legacy issue. That's something that ASIC doesn't need to spend as much time on. Conflicted remuneration, of course, there'll always be bits and pieces, and cases of potential conflicted REM on the margins. But again, I think the industry's really got its head around that. Grandfathering's gone now, so I feel like ASIC shifted its focus, and the focus now is in-house products, or let's call it management of conflicts more broadly, which is something that ASIC's very focused on. So we need to be aware of this, that when advising on an in-house managed account, ASIC will look at it with a greater level of scrutiny. So the best interest duty, again, not going to spend too much time on this. You act in the client's best interests, and we all know about the safe harbor provision. I've just highlighted two of the steps in red, which we're going to go into in more detail. And these are super important because in my view, you can't actually satisfy the best interest duty in respect of any product unless you do these two steps properly. And they're two areas where advisors fall down. The first is identifying the client's needs and objectives. You can't tailor if you don't know what the client's needs and preferences are, and I'm big on product preferences as well. Needs and objectives are sort of strategic, and there can be also product features and benefits that a client wants or doesn't want. If you don't identify those through a really thorough fact-find process, it's really, really hard to act in the client's best interests, because your advice can end up looking quite cookie cutter, quite generic, and it'll appear, if you're an auditor or an ASIC reviewing 10 or 15 files, that's when they can look really generic, and it looks like like cookie cutter advice. So it should be tailored to each client. You can't tailor if you don't know. The second piece, of course, is doing the product research. We've got a few slides on that. We'll go into that in some more detail later on. But of course, it's not just about doing the research, it's about capturing it, not necessarily dumping it all into the SOA, but having it on the file that you've actually gone and you've used Wealth Solver, or you use an external research house, you've used research from IMAP, whatever you've done. But the fact that you've actually gone to the trouble of interpreting that research and applying it to the client's circumstances. Appropriate advice as well, clearly, linked to best interest duty. It's important to spend some time on this just quickly though. What we're asking for, what the law is asking for with appropriate advice, is for advisors to be able to demonstrate a clear client benefit. It's like, all right, I follow the steps, but where's the client benefit here? How is the client going to benefit from this advice? So even Stevens kind of not good enough, is the point there. And it's a really good discipline for advisors. And I say this to a lot of my clients. If you're really struggling to articulate a clear client benefit, then you've got to go back and rethink the advice. Something's wrong. It shouldn't be hard. I do get, I've had clients come to me, licensees and individual advisors, saying, well, like I'd really like to, I'm really struggling how I can recommend my managed account when all these clients are in industry funds, for example, and mine's way too expensive. So, well, you're probably asking the wrong question. You need to probably go back and have a look at the structure of your managed account, and price, performance, and other features and benefits, and think about, is it competitive, and also are those the sort of clients that you should even be targeting? It's better than trying to sort of shoehorn a square peg into a round hole. Maybe think about being prepared to say no, and rather than trying to sort of start with the proposition of all right, well, I'll recommend my managed account, and then really struggling, well, how do I articulate a clear client benefit? It should be the other way around. So specifically, the law says that you have to explain how the recommended managed account will address the client's needs and objectives. Again, can't do that unless you've identified the client's needs and objectives. And of course, then, why it's likely to leave the client in a better position. Doesn't matter if there's a market downturn or things go pear-shaped in the future, doesn't matter. It's not retrospective, it's a point in time. You need to have a clear vision in your mind as the advisor as to why you think this will leave the client in a better position. You put that down on paper and you're in a really strong position. When ASIC comes and looks at files, they look for gaps. I always say, fill the vacuum yourself. Don't let ASIC fill it, because you won't like what they do. So if you have a clear vision in your mind as to how this managed account will address the client's needs and objectives better than their current investment structure, and why it's likely to leave the client in a better position, write that down in the SOA. And it's really hard for anybody, whether it's an auditor or ASIC or whoever, to sort of come back from that, because that becomes the starting position. Again, any recommendation must be linked to one or more of the client's needs and objectives and preferences. We often get questions about price. Is it possible? Does it have to be cheaper? ASIC's guidance is really clear that it doesn't. Clearly, price is a consideration, but it's not the only consideration. Other product features and benefits are relevant, especially if the client says that they are. ASIC has an example in RG175 where a client says, look, I'm happy to pay a little bit more, but I want much better reporting and I want to be able to log in online and follow my investments daily. And as in ASIC's example, the advisor recommends a different, I think it's a super fund, and it's 10 basis points more expensive, but ASIC states it is in the client's best interest because the client wanted this particular sort of portal type access. So price is always a consideration, but unless the client says, I just want the cheapest product, nothing else. Well, in that case, okay, maybe it is the only consideration, but in most cases it won't be. You'll take into account price and other features as well. So where do advisors go wrong? Well, this is based on ASIC reports 515 and 562, and I should say also our learnings from the Royal Commission. The three main areas, failure to do adequate product research. Look, in some cases it's failure to do the research. In other cases, it was the research was done, but it was a failure to actually capture it and explain it. It's not on the file anywhere. There may be research reports elsewhere, but really, and we'll come back to this in a minute. But the advisor should be able to explain the research they did and why that helped them determine that this managed account is appropriate for you. Second one is failure to tailor the advice to each individual client. We spoke about this before. Generic advice, cookie cutter advice. Look, I've worked with advisors who've got in trouble where, if you look, ASIC sends them a Section 33 notice and asks for 20 files. You review the 20 files, they all look the same. It's templated wording. The only thing that's different is other dollar amounts for the insurance and the super consolidation. But ultimately, it reads more like, I often say it reads more like a PDS. It's about the product, not about the client. I always, it sounds silly, but I think it's a good discipline is, think about starting every third paragraph with the client's name. Like, John, we discussed this, or Steve, or Sarah, you told me that you were not happy about these features of your current fund. So tailoring it to the client, really, really important. But the third one kind of covers everything, which is failure to keep proper documentation. I'd probably extend that to failure to properly, so it's keeping proper documentation is the worst thing, I suppose. There's no evidence there of complying with the best interest duty, no evidence of research, or whatever it may be. But an extension of that is also failing to properly explain the advice. So that's what I would call poor documentation rather than no documentation. Again, if you've got a really good reason, you've done your research, and you know the client's circumstances, and you've got really good reasons for recommending the managed account, you've got to write that down. And that's got to be in the SOA. There might be some, other research and stuff can go on the file, doesn't need to be all dumped into the SOA, but your chief reasons for recommending the managed account, that's just got to be front and center for ASIC to read or for an audit to read. So keeping the documentation and making it really good, clear documentation to tell the story to the reader. Otherwise, I've got their tree falling in the woods. If it's not on the file, did it really happen? So let's get down to specifics about managed accounts. Different strokes for different folks. You've probably heard me, if any of you have listened to me speak before, I've often said not all clients are the same. Every client is different. There's no one size fits all. But by the same token, not all investment structures are the same. And this is where we start talking about this idea of matching, trying to match product features and benefits to client needs and preferences. We have to understand there are different, and we talk about the super space. Of course, you've got industry funds and retail funds, and you've got SMSFs and so on. But in the non-super space, you've got the same. You've got pooled funds, managed funds, very different features from just direct equities or manual equities, unmanaged equities, or ETFs, and then of course managed accounts, which have, in my view, some of the best features of both of those. But each of those options has its own features and benefits. Just like clients are not all the same, those structures are not the same. And so if a good advisor has gone out and asked about and understood the client's needs, objectives, and preferences, product preferences or features, they will also understand that those needs, objectives, and preferences may be satisfied by one or two of those structures, but not the other one or two. It's unlikely that client's needs and objectives can be satisfied by any old structure. So it'll become pretty clear pretty early on if you've done that process. This, for whatever reason, this client wants transparency of holdings. There's after-tax issues they want to be able to manage, and they want to be able to sort of carve out tobacco products, whatever. This client needs a managed account. But you won't You won't know that unless you've asked the right questions. So again, we're about what, when it comes to managed accounts, in my view, it has to be having a really good knowledge in your mind of what are the key features and benefits of managed accounts more broadly. And of course, if I have an in-house offering, there might be sort of 10 of the best features of managed accounts. My managed account may only offer 7 of them, but that's pretty good. And it may be extra strong in 2 or 3. So having that in mind, and of course, by the same token, the client, and understanding that, you might have 70 clients in the door in a year and only 50 suited to a managed account. That's okay. And you're willing to either put the other 20 into a different type of investment structure or just say no and refer them to somebody else. But it's that having that knowledge of managed accounts more broadly and your managed account, and the knowledge of the client and matching those two. So what are the benefits? And far be it from me to suggest that I'm an expert in this area. I've listed 7. You could probably go for another. There's probably another 4 or 5 of the very, very best features. But I think it's the point of this slide is for everybody on this call to understand, whether it's written down or it's in your head, to understand what are these benefits of managed accounts versus other structures. Okay, so clearly trading efficiency, versus directly held asset, unmanaged assets. You don't need to separately authorize each trade or advise on and then get authorization for every trade. You massively reduce lag risk, improve efficiency, and actually, quite frankly, that can improve performance as well. Transparency, clients, unlike a managed fund, they can actually see where their money is invested right down to the individual assets. They know what assets they hold personally. Tax efficiency. Of course, some clients want to be able to manage their assets and take advantage of the flow through taxation treatment. Can't do that in a pooled fund, such as a managed fund. Cost saving with the netting of trades. Again, some of these are benefits versus managed funds. Others are benefits versus unmanaged equities, or unmanaged stocks. But they are all benefits of managed accounts. So clearly, cost savings when you can net trades and reduce transaction costs and CGT versus unmanaged equities. Beneficial ownership, the underlying investments are generally held in the client's name as the beneficial owner, which can massively improve portability if you want to change structures later on. Customization, not every managed account offers this, but a lot of them will offer the option to either substitute an investment or carve out an investment for ethical reasons or sustainability or what have you. And of course, diversification. Now you can get diversification through a managed fund, and you can theoretically get diversification through unmanaged equities, but it's harder. This is a way of you getting just instant diversification within a risk profile or within an asset class, just through a model portfolio in a managed account. So they're just some of the obvious benefits of managed accounts. And so having that in mind, how do we manage the potential conflict? Well, we do it essentially through ensuring that the advice is appropriate and that we're complying with the best interest duty, and that our advice process isn't leading to any client detriment. So I talk about a robust advice process. We manage the potential conflict, through a robust advice process. So first of all, I'm not going to bang on about it anymore. Identify the client's needs, objectives, and product preferences, if they have any. Some may not have any, but go through the process, find out. Of course, you have to research the client's existing investment structure. No 2 ways about it. Got to do it every single time. Does their existing structure satisfy their needs and objectives? Well, if they're in cash, and they've got other, long-term investment objectives or savings, obviously it's not going to. If they're in a pooled fund and they want it to be able to, have a beneficial holding of the assets and carve out certain exposures or take advantage of the after-tax treatment, they can't do that in a pooled fund, obviously, because there'll be deferred tax assets in there that can be essentially form part of their unit holding. So if you believe that their current structure isn't properly satisfying their needs, objectives, and preferences, you really should. In fact, the best interest duty says that you have to go and research other products or structures, at least, that may better satisfy those needs and objectives. And it may even be that their existing structure is satisfying 3 of their 5 main objectives, and you think you can find a structure that can satisfy 5 out of 5. So that's what the best interest duty is asking you to do. and we'll come back to the research stage. We've got a slide on that in a minute, but we believe that having done your research, you should conduct a comparative analysis of the existing structure versus the proposed structure. In this case, we'll talk about a managed account as being the proposed structure. And of course, you have to justify your recommendation. I've actually seen this done before where all the research is fantastic and they're identifying the client's objectives and it's all there, but it's left up to the reader to kind of infer why this is in the client's best interest. Just put it down. It might only be a couple of paragraphs. So you want to explain how the managed account will satisfy the client's needs, objectives, and preferences, which you've already captured. Why a managed account is likely to leave the client in a better position versus their current position. I'm a big fan of talking about trade-offs. Now, if there are any trade-offs, so for example, if you're talking about salary sacrifice, a potential trade-off may be the client's day-to-day living costs. Similarly, increasing insurance within super, the potential trade-off may be that it could erode their retirement savings. But again, every client's different. There may be reasons as to why, okay, there's a slight trade-off there, but given your needs and objectives, this is still absolutely appropriate for you. So you identify any potential trade-offs and explain why that's not a problem. And finally, ASIC strongly suggests that we discuss just capture a summary of the alternative strategies that you considered and why those are less advantageous than the recommended strategy. All right, so we'll talk about that in more detail now. Alternative strategies. So this is different than your product research. Product research comes after this. What Treasury and ASIC want you to do is include a summary of any alternative strategies considered. You don't need to go into a huge amount of detail, but you just need to show that actually, yeah, we did consider a few other things. We didn't just stampede towards this strategy of recommending a managed account and then our internal managed account. So what could these alternative strategies be? The obvious one is leaving the client where they are. We considered leaving you in your balanced multi, but that's not going to satisfy your needs and objectives for these reasons. Paying down mortgage or debt rather than putting that money into super or putting that money into investments is another alternative strategy. In the super space, it could be just consolidating their super into their current fund or into a retail fund or an industry fund. And of course, in non-super, and these two are most relevant for us when we're dealing with managed accounts, an alternative strategy would be to invest into a managed fund or funds outside of a managed account structure. Another one could be just to say, well, forget the managed account, just go into direct equities and we'll do a old-fashioned manual process. The reason I like alternative strategies is that when I read an SOA that has, usually only one or two, and one of them will usually be the client's current position. When you read, a brief summary of those one or two alternative strategies and a quick explanation as to why that's not appropriate, it's one of the best ways of highlighting why the recommended strategy is appropriate. So you can almost, you're providing more proof of the appropriateness of your recommended strategy by highlighting that these one or two, including their current plan, it's not appropriate. I think it's a really good discipline, and it's certainly, like I said, it provides that additional evidence to like an auditor or an ASIC reading an SOA and saying, oh, okay, yeah, well, that's actually a good point. They wouldn't want to do that because that's not going to be appropriate at all. So that alternative's out, and maybe the recommended strategies are better. Actually, it's looking like it's probably the best one for this particular client. So on to product research. Now, in our view, product research, by this stage, you've already decided that a managed account, a strategy for the client, I should say, a broader strategy for the client, which would include, we can assume that would include a recommendation of a managed account structure. So your product research, by the time you've got there, your product research doesn't need to, take into account other structures like sort of superannuation or managed funds and so on, because you've already determined by that point that that it has to be a managed account. So you really talk about researching different managed accounts. Now, to be clear, the advisor absolutely does not have to investigate every single managed account on the market. No, they do not. The advisor can, of course, rely on research from their licensee or from external research houses or from research from IMAP, for example. And what we're really talking about when we come to research, Wealth Solver, things like that, what we're really talking about is the advisor has to be the person who can interpret that. They have to be able to say, all right, I'm going to interpret that research and apply it to the client's circumstances. Because of course that pre-prepared research, they don't know the client, only the advisor knows the client. So it's about sort of having access to that licensee or third-party external research and interpreting it for the client. Licensees, especially if you're offering your own managed account, can make it a lot easier for their advisors by having this benchmarking done and providing it to the advisors to use. So benchmarking price and performance of their managed account versus other managed accounts in the marketplace. Makes the advisor's job a lot easier. Again, especially if the managed account's top quartile. After having done all that, what we like to see in the SOA is a comparison of absolutely the client's current product, the recommended managed account, yes. At least one. So you've researched a broader number. We think it's always a good idea to show at least one external managed account. So in particular, if the recommended managed account is an in-house one, we think it's absolutely necessary to show an external. So current investment solution, recommended in-house managed account, external managed account at the very, very least. And of course, ASIC's guidance is clear that if the advisor comes in, if the client comes in and actually asks you to review or look into a specific product, you have to do so. So if they say, oh, my mate Bill's in this fantastic alternatives fund, can you look into that? Well, okay, I'll research that for you. So what does bad look like? And we've seen every single shape imaginable. So when recommending a switch, essentially a switch into a managed account or any product for that matter. So bad looks like, so the first one there, our managed account offers online access, 20 plus portfolios, consolidated reporting, etc. Now that you might say, what's wrong with that? Some of those features may be relevant to the client, but there's nothing here suggesting that they are. So it's generic. It's more like a PDS. And like I said, I've seen SOAs that are all about the product and it's a cut and paste from a PDS and it's product features, nothing about the client. So some of these features and benefits may be relevant to the client and they may be a justification for the switch, but as it's presented there, just nothing about the client, just a list of features, many of which probably most managed accounts have and some managed funds have. That's not going to be enough. The second one there, I'm switching all of my clients into our managed account because, well, you don't need to go any further, stop right there. It's predetermined advice, isn't it? The advisors, predetermined, they get 100 clients or 150 clients with different needs and objectives. The advisors made a determination in advance that all of them are going to go into the managed accounts. Can't do that. It's backwards. What you need to do is follow a robust advice process and the outcome will take care of itself. If you follow that robust advice process with 100 clients and 83 of them end up in your managed account, so be it. It's theoretically, it could be 100. It's very unlikely, but it's actually more about following a process, acting in the client's best interests. If managed accounts generally are appropriate for most of those clients and your managed account is an excellent one, then a lot of them will probably end up there, but you can't put the cart before the horse. What does good look like? Well, good looks like it's all about the client. Jack, you want to retain your direct equities and ETFs, but you want them managed by a professional investment manager. So I've recommended a managed account structure. Makes sense, right? It's the obvious structure for Jack. Jill, you want beneficial ownership of your investments because you want to take advantage of after-tax benefits. Your current managed fund, being a pooled fund, it doesn't allow for this. So I've recommended a managed account structure. Again, these are really overly simplified examples, but clearly, it's been tailored to Jack in the first instance and Jill in the second. So ultimately, the message I try to really drive home to my managed account clients, being managed licensees and advisors who use managed accounts, not the ultimate clients, of course, they're your clients. But the message I try to drive home is that good questions will generally lead to good advice. Because if we're talking about matching features and benefits with client needs and objectives and preferences, you need to ask the right questions to be able to get that matching right. So you've got to know managed accounts and your managed account, and you've got to know the client. So you ask those questions. Sure, you ask about cost or price, but ask about other features as well. Get specific. Ask about transparency, tax efficiency, beneficial holdings, professional discretionary management. It's okay to have a conversation with these things with the client. You don't want to put words into their head, but you can absolutely introduce these topics, educate and ask questions. You may educate a client about managed accounts and the features, and they may say, I really appreciate that, but that's not important to me at all. I'm pretty happy. I just want to be in a really cheap index fund. Fine. But it doesn't need to be the case where the client walks in with a laundry list of their needs and objectives. It's not how it works. It's going to be a conversation. And then you match, once you've got those client needs and preferences, you can match them. And that may mean that it may be clear to you that a managed account structure is the right structure. It may be clear to you in some cases that it's absolutely not the right structure and they should remain where they are or move into a different, a cheaper multi or whatever the other structure may be. Again, clearly explain why the recommended managed account, whether it's your in-house one or not, will satisfy their needs and objectives and is likely to leave them in a better position. Include evidence of any, not evidence, but a summary at least of any strategies, alternative strategies you considered, their current position plan, for example, and include evidence on the file of your product research, and that'll be evidence in the comparison you include in the SLA. So we've got time for questions, but just to give you just to absolutely summarize the top 3 messages is that there is no such thing as one size fits all advice. There kind of never has been, but certainly post-Royal Commission, we know that for sure. There's no predetermined advice. You can't predetermine an advice outcome for a cohort of 100 or 200 people. It's one by one, client by client. One of the best mindsets to be in when you're speaking to a client, in particular if you're a user of managed accounts or a provider of an in-house managed account product, is to be matching those client preferences to product features. And again, just all of us have to be aware that it's already started. It's not going to go away anytime soon. ASIC will be applying much more scrutiny on any in-house product, including in-house managed accounts. So we've got plenty of time left for questions. I'll throw back to you, Jenny and Toby. I think I should stop sharing my screen.
Sure. Thanks, Simon. That's great. There's a lot to run through in a relatively short period of time. But I'm filtering through some of the questions and some of the questions that we received beforehand, and probably just trying to kind of capture with some of the points that you've covered off. A few people asked, how soon is too soon to introduce the managed account concept? So if you've got your initial meeting with the client, can you start talking about it then, or is that something that you should sort of hold off to later on?
I think you can start, well, it should be more focused on the client than any particular structure, but in those discussions with the client, you can start, first of all, you're going to start talking about their current structure, right? That's probably the first thing you're going to talk about. Where are they now? How are they invested and so on? And then you probably want to get an understanding. I wouldn't be focusing too much on managed accounts, but actually just features, product features and benefits, some of which will be features and benefits of managed accounts and others may not be. Now, I've helped a few of my clients who are either MDA providers or users of SMAs come up with actually a list of, and we're not reverse engineering it. It's not entirely skewed towards managed accounts, but as part of their fact finder FNA process, they include a list of sort of how important is this to you from 0 to 5, the least important to most important. So it's not just here, on day one, first 5 minutes of the conversation, here is managed accounts, here's why they're so good, here's why you should use them. It's actually sort of going from the other direction and saying, how important to you is transparency of holdings? How important to you is after-tax benefits? How important to you is price? And some of those will be benefits that can only be achieved through a managed account. And others will be benefits or features that can be achieved elsewhere. And we also like to include at the end of that, of course, we like to include free form space. So the client may say, well, actually, here's something else that's not on that list. So it's not, we're not trying to shoehorn the client into a managed account, but we're certainly trying to capture how they feel about those key features and benefits of managed accounts. And then if it's clear, well, hang on a minute, this client, we have to have a conversation about this. That's when you have the conversation about, well, here's this fantastic structure that can actually, might really benefit you.
Yeah. I mean, the good advice that I see through audit process is where you can see that there's a definite conversation about, what it is about the client. It's not the advisor kind of trying to drill in what their solution is, but actually finding out what the client wants and what those goals and objectives are. And it's really clear from the file notes and those discussions that they've encapsulated that. And along that journey, they've educated the client, depending on where that client is in their investment journey, is what those different strategies and what those different products look like. So more generic, as opposed to, hey, here I am and here's my managed account and this is what it is. And it's really about drawing out the client and understanding those goals and objectives. And that's what I see the good advice coming from. There's a few other questions here about in-house products and the conflict, and if the if there's no fees charged for the in-house product, is there still a conflict?
Yeah. So great question. So I've seen this a few times recently. I should say the overwhelming majority of my clients who use managed accounts do receive some sort of a fee. But if there's no fee, then there's absolutely no financial conflict. That's for certain. So if the advisor is in a position where they could recommend a third-party managed account or any third-party product, or they could recommend let's call it a white label managed account, and there's zero financial difference for them personally or for their licensee, then my view is, and in fairness, ASIC's view as well, is that the overwhelming, the most important feature, potential conflict, which is the financial aspect, is gone. It doesn't exist. There's no financial incentive for them to recommend their in-house product. What ASIC does say, however, so the answer that we probably want to hear is that no conflict, no worries, play on, right? What ASIC says is we accept that, let's call it 97% of the conflict has been eliminated. But there is a potential operational efficiency conflict there still. So so we often talk about the benefits of managed accounts for clients, but there also are benefits for advisors. So if life is going to be easier for an advisor or a licensee to have 100% of their clients, or most of their clients, in a specific managed account, just because it's easier for them, it's less workload, then there may not be a financial benefit, but there may be an operational efficiency benefit there for them. And in particular, if it's a white label, so they get their name on it, not receiving a fee, is there a sort of a branding benefit there for them as well? Say, we're one-stop shop. We've got your investment solution here, and we've got we can do your advice, and we can take care of all your admin as well. So I can't go so far as to say that there is zero conflict whatsoever. You'd need to be careful about, again, that same robust advice process, ensure that advisors open their mind to the idea of our particular managed account, or managed accounts generally won't be suitable for every single client. But what I will say is that you've eliminated, 97, 99% of the conflict, and you probably won't come under the same level of ASIC scrutiny.
So I think the message there is to just be robust in actually working through your conflicts process. So your licensee will have a conflicts process, and really documenting how you've worked out what the conflicts are and what they aren't, and how they're going to put the client in a better position.
That's right. Yeah.
I suppose then on the other side of that is where fees are being charged is, one of the questions that we had was that what level of fee needs to be disclosed in the SOA? Like, how granular do we need to get?
In the SOA or in the FDS? Was this one about?
No. Sorry. Yes, I think you're talking about, OFA, sorry, FDS.
Yeah, in the FDS. So now this one is not very well understood. So only sort of ongoing fees need to be disclosed in the FDS, and that excludes product fees. So if you're charging an advice fee of $5,000 a year, and there's a separate investment management fee for managing some of the assets, whether it's a component or all the assets in the managed account, that's defined as a product fee, which is carved out of the definition of an ongoing fee arrangement. So now I absolutely know of a lot of advice firms that just lump everything into the FDS. That's fine. That's up to them. But strictly speaking, a fee for, and there's a specific ASIC reg for it, but if it's a fee for the operation, management or administration of a financial product, which a managed account is a financial product, that's carved out of the definition. Now, where those fees are bundled together, it's quite interesting. There is some specific guidance on this in the MDA reg guide. Understanding that SMAs fit within the definition of managed accounts, but I think it's pretty good guidance for all managed accounts, which says, okay, if you're bundling together your product fees, your investment management fee, and your advice fees, that's fine. It's essentially up to you to say, can you split those out? If you can say, well, hang on, we know that 1% is for advice and 30 basis points is for portfolio management. Okay, great. Then you put the 1% in the FDS. If you can't split those out, if it's not possible for you to do so, you have to put the whole 1.3 into the FDS.
Yeah, that's all makes sense to me. Okay. Ooh, we've got quite a few questions here. I'm just trying to filter through. Outside of, I think you've covered this, but just to be really clear, outside the normal best interest duty considerations, is there anything special for managed accounts that you need to consider? So in my view, that, you know, qualified financial advisor should know the best interest duty. So is there anything that you've got to add to that, Simon?
Only, like, I mean, in the presentation, we went through some of the specific features and benefits. So I think that to assist you in how do I put this? We don't want to predetermine the advice, but if you are going to consider a managed account for most of your new clients or existing clients, then you need to understand really well what are the features and benefits of managed accounts and the potential advantages versus other structures. And then, of course, you can't match those to the client unless you know the client. So unless you're capturing, and this goes for any product, the second one goes for any product. Yeah. If you're not capturing the client's needs, objectives, and preferences, you're going to have a really hard time complying with the best interest duty.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I've got an in-house managed account and I'm a big exponent of the structure, and I think it's fantastic, which I do, and I think a lot of us do, you've got to be able to, it should be front of mind. You've got to be able to articulate that in your own head, talk to the client about it, put it in the SOA and match it to their needs and objectives.
Yeah, sure. There's kind of a couple of questions about, you know, sometimes what needs to be in a file note and what needs to be in the SOA. So there's a couple of things there where, you know, it's a better position statement. It doesn't specifically say in the reg guide that it has to be in there, but you did touch on that in the presentation, that if you've got it in the SOA, it gives clear guidance that.
I just say, put it in, cover yourself, yeah. Right? ASIC likes the low-hanging fruit, so just don't be low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. And what was the other question here? Just about the alternatives. So we talked about, you talked about the alternative strategies and structures, and then also, you know, you might delve into different products. So if you've got a range of different products on your APL, for your licensee's APL, you might consider one of those different products. Yeah. Again, you know, I've got a view, but your view on what needs to be in the SOA regarding those alternatives.
I think you need to capture. Well, sorry. Best in summary is that the research needs to be on the file and it should be summarized in the SOA.
Yeah,
that's probably what I'd say. ASIC reviews files. They don't just review SOAs, but what's the first document they review? Probably the SOA, right? And they'll probably review the fact find second to see if that lines up. And if it doesn't, well, hang on, was there a file note in between those? Why is there needs objective changes? But if you get the SOA right, it's supposed to be able to tell a story. And I hate to say this, but an SOA is as much an ASIC/auditor facing document as it is a client facing document. But if the SOA tells the story and explains the research you've done, they may just flick back and actually say, okay, well, I can see that he or she's used Wealth Solver, or they've done a detailed comparison here, and that lines up with what I can see here at the comparison table. So, okay, I'm comfortable with that. So you don't want to overload the SOA with, you know, sort of unwieldy or sort of clumsy levels of really detailed research that the client can't follow. You certainly don't want to load it up with generic research either that isn't client specific, but a good summary is enough for the SOA.
Yeah. I'm seeing what else have we got here. So I think there's so there was one question about, and this kind of goes through about general advice and personal advice for managed accounts, and also separately managed accounts. So the question is, could you recommend an SMA, so separately managed account, using a record of advice, so as a further advice tool, or is there, you know, some requirement that it always has to be done under an SOA?
For an SMA, I think technically you could. So yeah, so just to be clear, so an MDA you can't. Obviously, you need to do an SOA and an investment program and so on. SMAs are under the responsible entity, the registered managed investment scheme regime, so slightly different, even though we refer to them all as managed accounts. So strictly speaking, if the client's needs and objectives haven't changed, and you provide them with the details you need to about the interest and associations of the advisor and the advice firm, and any fees or benefits that the advisor or the licensee will receive. And you have to actually give them this, by the way. So I know an ROA doesn't need to be given to the client, but these things do. And finally, of course, the 947D replacement product disclosure, and that's a really important one. If you give them all three of those things, then yeah, technically you could recommend an SMA only, not an MDA, pursuant by using an ROA. There's three reasons I've just mentioned as to why that's not really practical. The other one is, well, not practical, but it's just that once you're going to do all these three things, it's almost like, well, am I now just going to do an SOA? Is that a bit easier? The other one is, again, whilst it's possible, I think, well, what's the reason? Why the change now? What's happened in the client's circumstances that suggests that the managed account, the SMA, is appropriate for them now? Has there really been no change at all? Maybe, but I'd suggest that in most cases, while it's technically permissible, in order to satisfy yourself that, has there really been a change in their needs in their circumstances? And also, well, I have to give them these three other things anyway, I'll just do an SOA, which is probably, by the way, why we rarely see it, because it's more of a practical issue when it comes to SMAs.
I think there's been quite a few other questions about, we're sort of talking about the licensee, providing assistance to their advisors to do that research of the SMAs and the MDAs, but, people are sort of asking where we can see that research. Is, might be a question for me and Toby, or, whether you've got a view. So my experience of that is that managers of managed accounts will look to get themselves rated, and some of them are rated. So if they're running under responsible entity model, you can go to Morningstar, Lonsec, those types of rating agencies. Otherwise, it's about looking to your peer group and understanding what those products are. Some of those informations, and particularly now with DDO coming in, there's a lot more information that's out there to give you a few sort of high-level comparisons, but the information's there if you are looking for it, but you can't just rely on that your product is the best one out there without doing the appropriate research. So is there anything you wanted to add to that, Simon, before we finish up?
Just the importance of benchmarking. So like I said, I sort of don't like ASICs that use the word investigate. That's all fine, but I feel like that gets done by research professionals, whether at the licensee or externally or what have you, or at IMAP. But what the advisor's job is the interpreter. They need to be able to take that and apply it. And I think, well, what can the licensee do or the MDA provider do to help the advisor do that? Well, really clear benchmarking about their in-house MDA. Where does it sit in terms of price and performance? And by the way, it's a really good feedback loop too for the MDA provider or the licensee to say, well, hang on, we're slipping a bit in terms of price and performance or features. Some other managed accounts have the similar price and performance, but they've got additional features. I think it's a really healthy feedback loop, and it can, like I said, it can make the advisor's job much easier.
Yeah. No, just about
Simon, thanks very much, and Jenny, thank you very much. And Simon, your last point about benchmarking is an excellent segue into one of the points I wanted to mention, because a number of the questions that came up today were about DDO and the sort of interrelationship between DDO and managed accounts. We've done a lot of work in IMAP together with the FSC on developing templates and in thinking through the challenges that DDO presents for managed accounts and the opportunities that it gives rise to. But to touch on your benchmarking point, one of the requirements of DDO is that you do review your product on a periodic basis, annual or 3 yearly, most, and that requires you to have a fact base which says, is this product competitive which is to your broader point about benchmarking, is it likely to meet the likely goals of the likely clients? So we've done a lot of work on DDO. There've been a couple of questions about the slides and about the presentation itself. We'll be posting tomorrow the video of today's presentation along with the slides. There've been some excellent subtle questions come up, so we'll actually compile those into a sort of truncated list, and we'll publish those with a all care no responsibility answer as part of the sort of the follow-on materials from today's session. Anything else you'd like to touch on, Jenny or Simon?
No, just thanks very much for everyone listening and participating. So it makes it a lot more interesting, you know, in this little square box. So keeps it a bit more interactive. And so I think, you know, managed accounts are a great solution for the right people. And, you know your client and just make sure you thoroughly know the products and the solutions that are available to you before you recommend them.
So thank you very much, Simon. In particular, thank you.
Thanks,
I know these things are a lot of work to put together. So,
yeah, no, I'll say thanks so much for having me, and to all the listeners, I appreciate it as well. And if anyone needs any advice or assistance on managed accounts or wealth more broadly, then please feel free to get in touch.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. See you.